Hi, this is Ms. Holly from Olympian High School. I'm going to teach you a quick video lecture. This part is about nationalist aspirations as one of the causes of the Great War, which would later be called World War I. Remember here, the word great means large. It doesn't mean it's wonderful. It means it's large. Okay, so the world in upheaval, the world in chaos. The beginning of this chapter starts with the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, who is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was traveling in Sarajevo, which is in a territory called Bosnia-Herzegovina. Remember, a lot of these places have changed names. So you won't see a country called Austro-Hungarian Empire anymore. You'll see Austria, you'll see Hungary, and many of these places have changed names. So in any case, this was an area where many Serbian people lived, and they felt like the Austro-Hungarian Empire shouldn't govern them. They wanted their own independence, their own autonomy, many of them. So this area had been occupied and then later annexed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The heir to the throne, his name's Francis Ferdinand. He was in favor of greater Serbian autonomy, but this was not enough for some Serbian extremists who planned to assassinate him while he was in Sarajevo. Gavrilo Princip is the name of one of the young assassins he was one of 7 assassins that day. I don't have time to teach you about all of these assassinations, but you should Google it. It's fascinating. Read about how Princip shot Ferdinand and his pregnant or expectant wife, and they both died. Princip tries to swallow ineffective cyanide. He's captured by the mob and tortured, but because he's not quite 20 years old, the courts don't allow him to be executed. So instead, he's sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he dies before his term is up because of tuberculosis. So you can read about that. Now, the effects of Princip's bullet will be to set off a conflict that leads to, of global proportions, that leads to at least 50 million people being dead. That's a low estimate. 20 million people injured, multiple empires falling, especially the multinational empires, because of different ethnic groups wanting their own nations, the rise of 9 new countries, massive global economic dislocations or changes economically around the world, and the end of Europe's primacy or dominance in the globe. Now, even if Princip's bullet hadn't caused this conflict, other things would have. What are those other things? We're going to explore them. But the competing nationalisms, different groups that want their own country, especially in Southern and Eastern Europe. The second underlying cause, rivalry or competition among empires, especially between Britain and Germany. We're going to look at all of these more closely, but right now I'm just introducing them to you. Inflexible diplomatic alliances. I'll explain what those things are in a later lecture. Inflexible diplomatic alliances. So let's talk about the first one, competing nationalisms, right? So when I was just talking about competing nationalisms. So it says right here, this is the inevitable outcome of the French Revolution. When France occupied many of the areas in Europe, it basically had a reaction of, it's kind of like if we're the Olympian Eagles and we go to another school and we're like, yeah, Eagle Pride, and we dominate over them, then that school might say, no, Turtle Pride, or whatever their mascot is. So it causes a sense of like rallying around your ethnic identity or your nationalistic identity. So when Napoleon invaded, it has this reaction of fueling nationalism in the places where he occupied. You also have this concept of self-determination, which is the idea that an ethnic group should have the right to make their own state. We see this in Belgium when Belgium wins its independence from the Netherlands in 1830. We see it in the unification of Italy, which we've already learned about in 1861. And in Germany in 1871. So these are all new states that are very proud to have their own new country. But what about those groups that haven't made their own country yet? Many of those people wanted their own state, but they lived in multinational empires, which just means that there are many different ethnic groups in the empire, but they don't feel united. They still want their own country. For example, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you have people who were called Slavic people, especially the South Slavs, are very interested in their own country. And this was sort of fueled by the Russians, who helped support Slavic sentiment or Slavic nationalism, because really what they wanted was the Slavs to secede so that then Russia could come later and annex them. You also have different ethnic groups in the Russian Empire that want independence, like the Poles, Ukrainians, and Balts. And in the Ottoman Empire, you have different groups that also want their own independence, like the Greeks, who won independence in 1830, the Serbians, Romanians, Bulgarians. These are all groups that want their own independence. I'll be teaching you about the other underlying causes in the next video lecture.